no pressure then, just one of the most famous and most beloved aircraft in all of history. Hey guys, it's model making time and we're back today looking at the Supermarine Spitfire. As usual, we're going to go through a history of the aircraft itself, which I'll explain in a little moment because obviously it's got quite a rich history, and also we'll have a look at the aircraft in gaming, and we'll also have a look at the history of the kit that I'm building today as well. Now, there are few aircraft that evoke as much emotion and response as the Spitfire, and whilst I've always been more of a hurricane girl, you know me, I cannot deny the absolute grace and elegance of the sublime Spitfire. Today I'm going to go through quite a high level history of it. Now, as I sort of mentioned earlier, because the history of this aircraft is so intense and so in-depth, like, I'm not going to go through everything. If you want to see more in-depth documentaries, the Imperial War Museum did sort of a beginning to end look of the Spitfire, and I'll link that in the description below. Also, there was a fantastic documentary by Doug A. James, which I actually watched prior to actually doing this video, and honestly, I can't recommend it enough. So once you finish watching this video, be sure to check him out and tell him that I sent you. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the history of the Spitfire. The Spitfire had its origins in the Schneider Trophy. The Schneider Trophy was like a seaplane racing speed record breaking event. It was phenomenal, and a lot of famous aviators grew from that event really, and the Spitfire is one of the products of that. But it wouldn't be as simple as taking a design from the Schneider Trophy and turning it into a Spitfire. There were a lot of middle steps to take before we get there. The Spitfire had its lineage in sort of the S series, most notably the S5 and S6, but they were directly derived from the S4, which unfortunately sort of crashed during its race run, though prior to that it did set a record for speed. It's quite tragic really. The initial Spitfire design was designed to compete with the order that was put out, which generated fighters such as the Gloucester Gladiator. Now, Spitfire is obviously a very different breed of aircraft, and the aircraft that was designed to compete with the Gladiator itself, the one that was actually hit forward for that tender, was a very different beast to what we know today. The variant was then known as the Type 224. I think it's actually quite a graceful design, though I know a lot of people will probably say it's not. It reminds me of some of the Wang-Wo aircraft, and I mean, you can see the picture, you understand what I'm trying to express here. This aircraft was relatively disappointing and did obviously not win the tender, but development continued. RJ Mitchell had complete faith in the aircraft and knew that he could build a winner. The Type 300 was developed from the Type 224, and this would be where we'd start to see the design features that we're familiar with the Spitfire. Amendments were made to the aircraft, such as the engine, which was changed to what we now know as the Merlin engine, and also the four Vickers 7.7mm machine guns were replaced by 7.7mm Browning machine guns, but instead of it being 4 in total, so 2 on each wing, it was 4 on each wing. The prototype took to the skies on the 5th of March 1936 for 8 minutes. This test flight though was later than its contemporary, the Hawker Hurricane. It was actually 4 months later, so that's quite a significant leap, especially when you think about how rapidly aviation design was changing in that period. As a standard in pre-series production, the aircraft still continued to have developments made, but it would lead to a successful order. Just before its first public appearance on June 27, 1936 at Hendon Air Display, 310 aircraft had been ordered by the Air Ministry, and that happened on the 3rd of June 1936. Now, Supermarine itself didn't have the capacity to build it, already being busy with its seaplane designs, and Vickers, the parent, didn't have the space for it either because they were busy with their Wellington bombers. Vickers weren't particularly fond of the idea of subcontracting out other parts for their dual aircraft, the Spitfire, and when it was, they found that parts were not particularly up to scratch, they were of low quality. In the end, someone in the Air Ministry was fighting on Supermarine's side, and they saw the potential of the Spitfire and said that instead of Supermarine going on to build the Beaufighter, they would instead focus on Supermarine Spitfire production. Passing away on the 11th of June 1937, RJ Mitchell never saw the first production Spitfire fly, which wouldn't happen until mid-1938. Aged just 42, RJ Mitchell had succumbed to the cancer which he'd had operations for earlier. A truly sad affair where RJ Mitchell had fought valiantly to continue working on his passion, aviation, aircraft, the Spitfire. This would mean that the aircraft would come into their production flights 24 months after they were initially ordered, but would remain a true legacy of R.J. Mitchell and obviously have significant importance during the war. Although the Hawker Hurricane may have had the numbers and the presence during the Battle of Britain, overall in World War II the Spitfire would make its presence absolutely known, both through propaganda on both sides of the war and psychological impact. The Spitfire was a force to be reckoned with and showed that the RAF had something that could compete with the Bf-109. That is a really short, condensed history of the Spitfire, sort of just where it came from. I didn't want to go into full detail because, as I say, really the Spitfire's development is so long and rich. I didn't really feel like I could do it justice in one video and thought I'd just do a small introduction. If you want more information, as I say, Doug A. James's documentary is absolutely fantastic. There's pictures and video throughout, it's absolutely stunning. And as I said as well, the Imperial War Museum do have a sort of video that's done from sort of Mark 1 up until the end of the Spitfire's legacy, so truly check them out after you've seen the rest of this video. But first, I guess we're going to have to do the Spitfire in gaming. Given that this aircraft is the poster child of the RAF in World War II, of course, it is ever present in combat flight simulator games and also in general flight simulator games. It's such a beloved aircraft. So we'll start where I quite often start, which is with Microsoft's Flight Simulator and Combat Flight Simulator. There are a number of standalone mod packs available for Combat Flight Simulator 3, which is the most recent iteration, although obviously it's available for the older ones as well, which will allow you to fly the Spitfire in the Battle of Britain or in other theatres. Combat Flight Simulator 3, as I've mentioned before, is sort of abandonware now and is quite easy to get a hold of, and it has so much freeware available to it that I can't recommend it enough. It's fantastic, it's kind of held up well graphically, so if you do want to check it out, I thoroughly recommend it. You won't be wasting your time at all. Also, it's great with a joystick. I mean, we mentioned this in our Boomerang video, so, you know. As with Combat Flight Simulator, unsurprisingly this aircraft is in pretty much every version of Microsoft's Flight Simulator as well, and importantly is also in the most recent iteration. This first video I'm showing you is by Into the Blue Simulations, flying Aeroplane Heaven's Spitfire Mark 1 through Snowdonia, and you can really see how detailed and rich this model is. And it makes me very jealous. I really want to fly this. It looks fantastic. It makes me want to install Flight Simulator again. Flying Line also do a Spitfire Mark 9C, and you can see this being flown by Squirrel here, and it's also just as gorgeous. Although you might actually be paying for these are like fantastic models, and there are of course freeware conversions generally from FSX to FS 2020, and I have seen some general freeware versions around as well, so you don't have to look too hard, but I just thought I'd highlight these. They look absolutely amazing, and if you're really into Flight Simulator, given that, you know, if you have Game Pass it's free, it's definitely worth a look. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about X-Plane. It's sort of the competitor to Micro Flight Simulator, although at the moment I think they're waiting for the newest version, but there are freeware models available for X-Plane as well. Because we're making the model of the Mark 1, I found this variant, which you can see Jacob Estel do a roll-in in X-Plane 11. Now, X-Plane really isn't my jam, so you'll have to forgive me if there are better versions out there, but, you know, it's not really my thing. I haven't really flown it since Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 came out, so you'll have to forgive me if that is the case. One other thing I wanted to touch on was an older game actually, and this is one that I did do a video on a long time ago. My voice is probably a little bit different, but this is called Their Finest Hour Battle of Britain. This is actually the game that got me into combat flight simulators in general, and just gaming, I guess, really. I think after Thomas the Tank Engine games, this was like the first proper video game I ever did, so you know, I really have a special place in my heart for this. The artwork, everything about it, I love it. And doing this video gave me an excuse to go back and fly it. You can do it with a joystick if you're doing it through DOSBox as well, and it's a much better experience than mouse and keyboard, which is what I did when I was a kid. But yeah, it's another fun little flight simulator game you can do. I mean, it hasn't aged really well, but it's just nostalgia for me. So I just thought I'd throw that one out there as well. So if we come back to the present a little bit, we can also see that DCS has a Spitfire as well. Again, DCS is something that I'm not super familiar with. However, Growling Sidewinder, which is probably my favourite DCS content creator, is obviously really familiar with the game, and I really recommend you go and check out their video after you've finished watching this one, obviously, but they do a remarkable job at demonstrating the Spitfire DCS. If the words free and casual catch your fancy, and I mean in this climate, who doesn't love something that's free, then War Thunder might catch your fancy. War Thunder is probably my most played combat flight simulator, in part because it is free, but also because it has a lot of different nations. Now, the Spitfire features us in a lot of different focus trees, whether it's the French, Italians, or British. And although at the moment the Spitfire is sort of out of its comfort zone, it's got a lot of really strong competitors at the rank it's been placed at now, it's still an absolute joy to fly, and getting a kill on it is just nothing short of spectacular. The Spitfire has a lot of games that it features in, whether it's old games like Blazing Angels or newer games like IL-2. These videos are mainly about models and I didn't want to spend too long going through it, so if you are curious, I honestly just recommend, if you have a favourite game series, the Spitfire is probably there. But if you're looking for ultra realistic at the moment, DCS and IL-2, and if you're looking for something a bit more casual, War Thunder or Flight Simulator. Model history time. Well, the model we're making today is part of a set. It was called the Authentic Collector's Set. A weird name if you ask me, but it came with a VHS and the model with some acrylic paints, glue and a brush. Now, the model itself has the artwork that I love the most. I think out of any of Airfix's artwork, this is probably my favourite. It's really dynamic, has a lot of depth to it. I actually have I think like a steel plate artwork version of this that I got in like some random store. Yeah, that's really why I picked this edition. I thought having the VHS would be a bit novel. And although it's a product of its time and there are probably better documentaries out there now for the history of the RAF, back then it would have been a really cool collection to have. This kit though is old and it dates back to 1974, with the re-release happening in 1979 when it was taken from a blister pack to a normal box. The Authentic Collector's Edition was released in 1999ish, and as I say, features that VHS alongside it, which is really the main selling point to, you know, show the model and history of it. I guess sort of like how I'm doing these videos today. From what I could tell from my research, I think a tooling of this is still produced by Hella, although now it's a Spitfire Mark VI. It's obviously got some variations, but from what I can tell, it is based on the original 1974 tooling, but don't quote me on that. Sometimes, you know, looking at these things, it can be a bit hard to know. Airfix, on the other hand, doesn't release this tooling anymore. They actually had a new tooling done in 2010, which, my god, that's 12 years ago, but it's a fantastic edition. And other variants of the Spitfire that Airfix have done have also started getting new toolings as well, so really it looks like an end of an era for the old tools of Spitfires from Airfix. Anyway, I think that's enough talking. Should we get into the actual model? Let's have a look inside the box, and then we'll have a look at the construction. Well, let's get into it, the Authentic Collector's Edition. This is a really lovely and unique boxing of the Spitfire, and I can't wait, I love that artwork. So, the box itself, quite standard, there's nothing really surprising about it, and it is of the lower difficulty, so we should expect this kit to be easy. The condition is really good, mainly because it's been inside another bigger box, so nothing's really affected this, which is really, really nice. You can see the sprues here of an older design of Airfix, very different to how they are now. Detail isn't bad though, especially when you consider the age of the kit itself. It's actually kind of remarkable how much detail there is. Even the pilot actually looks really lovely in this edition, so I'll actually be adding this to my kit. The fuselage, which unfortunately didn't get too much footage of the front, actually looks really nice as well, and the clear part of the canopy, you can see there's no distortion through the glass itself, no discoloration. It's actually kind of immaculate, which is kind of shocking. Again, older Airfix kits not necessarily always the best with clear parts, but this one was amazing. The decals do have some sign of aging and cracking and speckling, but this is to be expected. Again, considering their age, decals are the first thing to go in a kit I always find, so not a shock. Now for this Spitfire, I actually decided I was going to use Humbrol's RAF colour set so that I could just do it all in one paint brand and try something different to Revell. This set was relatively cheap. I think I ended up picking it up for less than £15 and comes with a lot of paints. I started with a pilot. pilots tend to be quite hard to do at 1/72nd scale. They're very small, and getting detail in there can be quite hard, particularly on the faces. You're depending more so on implying that there is detail than actually putting the detail there in most cases, and that's definitely what I did. You can see I started off with the leather brown coat and hat, and then I did the black booties. I would go over with blue as well, and then ink the whole thing to get this lovely image at the end. And I think this actually turned out quite well, again, considering that this is smaller than my smallest fingernail, so, you know, these are tiny models. You then do the propeller assembly to make sure that it can spin freely whilst in the model, and I painted the inside of the cockpit like a cockpit green. Don't know if this was a Vallejo colour or a Tamiya. I think this one was one of the few paints I used that was outside of the sets that I got. The inside of the cockpit is assembled separately, which consists of the seat that the pilot sits in, and I think a joystick, and you glue those in after you put the propeller in place and then join the fuselages together with it inside, which you can see I've done here. That's the main bulk of the construction done, to be perfectly honest. After that, it's a case of fitting the wings, which I just dry fitted first, and then I went ahead and just popped some glue in to make sure that it would fit in. There are some gaps that do emerge from this that you will need to milliput or whatever, use some sort of putty to fill in, but again, that's quite common on older kits. The wings actually fit in really easily, and I didn't really find I had to use too much force to get them to fit in. That was a bit tricky at times. I just had to make sure it got the perfect fit. A lot of holding down is necessary at this stage. I then hit glue on the top of the wings in order to allow the top part of the wing to be assembled. This gives it the full elliptical shape and makes it really look like the Spitfire that you know it is. Do the same on both sides, hold it in place, and I think I actually taped it in place, but I've tried to avoid showing you all that because it's not particularly interesting. Putting the landing gear in is as simple as putting in these two rods and then adding on the wheel cover. Obviously it only covers half of the wheel, but sort of the landing gear assembly cover, and then you put the wheels on as well. I actually found this undercarriage assembly really good, which, you know, I'm really quite a stickler for good landing gear, and this was one of the best for a kit of its age, so yeah, really impressed really. Just spinning the propeller to make sure it still all works, and it does, unsurprisingly. So that's pretty much it, the model's done. I did put on obviously the tail section separately. Now for painting, unfortunately I did miss doing the green initially. I think I just forgot to hit record on my camera, but going over with the brown, you can see that, you know, it's quite a rich, clean colour. It goes on really nicely, really easily, and yeah, it's all over. I think I just did, it was either Humbrol or Tamiya primer initially. I think it was Tamiya if I remember correctly. Follow the pattern all the way around the aircraft, and I have actually tried to copy the box art somewhat for once. I thought, you know, I'd actually try to. Normally I just take the box art as an inspiration, which I think is completely fine. There were so many different sort of camos around that realistically, as long as you're doing something that is a derivative of what you can see, it will probably look fine in the end. But I decided to just for once to try and actually max the box art. Now with these paints you will have to do more than one layer, and that's common with all acrylics, to be honest. With any video I've done more than one layer, and you try and normally go opposite the brush strokes that you've already done to try and hide any brush strokes. I have done it somewhat on this, but because it's a camera palette it can be quite hard to make sure you always do that. But I did get 2 coats pretty much on all the areas. I've just shown a little bit of that here so you can see that I did do that. It's the only way really to get a proper solid colour. The underneath is painted in a sky blue. I've always loved this colour. I think it's just a gorgeous off-white with it's sort of a white with a blue undertone, and it's just lovely. It's really easy to paint onto the model, and it doesn't really require too much effort. You can see that I've painted the whole thing here, and it's just a case of making sure I line it up. I'm just wiping off some excess where it's gone over onto the brown, and I will clear that up later. I don't think I recorded that either, but you just go over and clean it up. These little bits underneath can be quite thin and tricky on a Spitfire because it's such a thin rear fuselage. For whatever reason, I think I decided to do this really late at night, so the camera looks a bit rubbish, but this is me just putting on the decals. The decals actually held up. I was really surprised. I was worried I was going to have to buy another set, but nope, these actually all went on okay. I think there may have been a few areas where it did sort of you know, speckle, but you can't really tell too much on the actual kit at the end, which is, you know, the most important thing. Once the two big rounders are on the top of the wings, it really gets its aria feel, and then popping on the side pieces, which all go on in one go, you just have to put in the red centerpiece to the roundel, which is common again on older kits. I know nowadays they tend to print in red inside, but this is just sort of a limitation that existed on older printers, is my understanding. So you have to put the dot in yourself. It is a decal, so you do just slide it on top of the existing decal, and it's not too hard to center them. You think it's really hard, but it's really not. I went over the whole model with some inks. I think this is it Agrax Earthshade. It's the Citadel miniatures, like the Warhammery painty, and I just went over, you know, just to make sure all the panel lines got some ink, and I went over and left some ink on there and then rubbed it off. I'm not going to show you exactly how it looked in the end, you'll just have to wait for the final reveal. Okay, that's it, the model's been made. Just so you know, this model will feature in an upcoming video, a massive project that I've done. So this is sort of a sneak peek, I guess, in a little way. So for the first time, let's have a look at my Spitfire Mark 1A. Well, I must say it looks pretty clean and looks pretty good, especially given the age of this kit. I think I've done it justice. Am I the best modeler in the world? Honey, no, we already know this. I'm the average model maker, that's why I am this modeler. But I'm sort of vibing with this old school Spitty, I'm not gonna lie. Is it as good as the newer tools? No. But is it still good? Yeah, it holds up surprisingly well. And if you can get this for a bargain, like literally a couple of quid, fantastic deal, do it. I have seen them occasionally for that price, either at shows or on eBay, so, you know, but I really wouldn't want to pay a lot for it. But considering its age, the decals have held up well, and the overall plane just looks amazing. Just be aware, the cockpit, yes, has slid up a little bit, I know. Whilst I was moving it, I knocked it off and I had to apply a lot of pressure to get it on in the first place. I think my pilot's just sort of askew and I don't really want to have to do it again, so I'm accepting that that's just how it looks for now. But I guess I should go through the normal buy or fly. I've sort of answered this a couple of times and it remains the same. If you can get this, I would say a hard limit of £5 or under. Probably actually under £5, like $4.99 or below. Then yeah, get this kit. It's a good build, it's fun, it doesn't take very long to do at all, and it will look good. That's one of the important things, it will look good. But given the price of the newer toolings, it may not be worth your money because some of the newer toolings are actually really reasonably priced, often on discounts or on sales, and you know, it makes it a really hard sell for these older kits. One thing I will say is don't just buy one of these and put it in your stash, it's pointless. You'll end up buying a better Spitfire and it will just become more and more redundant. If you're going to buy this, kit bash it or just get it done or use it for experimenting. I don't want to see these things go to waste, but at the end of the day there's a lot of these floating around and they're just not as good as their newer counterparts. So I suppose my overall answer is probably fly away, unless you literally have nothing in your stash to build and you just want to build something in one weekend, then I guess that would be a time to buy it, but otherwise just fly away from it. You can get something probably more interesting, more appealing, and probably of a higher quality. I'm not trying to throw that much shade at Airfix, by the way, because this kit's literally old enough to be my dad, and I feel like when you get to that point, it's okay to accept that the kits might not be that good anymore. And again, good in a relative sense compared to newer kits with newer technologies, higher degrees of accuracy and just better quality plastics. Well, I think that about wraps it up for me. Thank you so much for exploring the Spitfire Mark 1 area by Airfix with me. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel, it really does help the girl out. Remember to like the video as well and leave a comment below. Let me know what your favourite World War II fighter was. That's if it's not the Spitfire, because I imagine that is the case for a lot of you. But like, even if it is, just tell me the variant of the Spitfire that you love. Also, if you do want to support this channel, then please head over to Ko-fi. The link is in the description, as you can see here as well. That's somewhere where you can donate to me either one-off or for a, monthly donations or like Patreon, and it just helps support me buying new things. Like hopefully pressing my airbrush, which I think is repaired now. So yeah, let me know. How am I so bad at ending videos still? Bye guys! Bye! Thanks for watching the video, I really appreciate it. Hit the subscribe button and notification bell to be notified of every new video on Mondays. You'll also be able to see me stream live on YouTube. Thanks again, I really appreciate it. Have fun modelling!